It's the end of another year, and you're wondering where it went. Not in the wistful greeting card sense. In the specific, slightly alarming sense of knowing that January was 3 weeks ago, and somehow it is already December, and you cannot account for the intervening 11 months with any detail that would satisfy a court of inquiry. The months passed. You were there. You have almost no idea what happened to them. And this is getting worse. That's the part nobody warns you about. The acceleration is not a fixed rate. It is compounding. At some point in your 30s or 40s or 50s, you notice that the years are not just going by faster. They're going by faster than they were going by faster before. The compression is ongoing. A year at 40 does not feel the same length as a year at 30, which felt nothing like a year at 20, which was an eternity compared to summer when you were 8. Summer when you were 8 was an epic. It was a geological era. It contained everything. It lasted forever and was over before it started. And both of these things were simultaneously true, because time at 8 is fundamentally different from time at 40. Why? The question is not rhetorical. The answer is neurological, mathematical, psychological, and practical. And it is considerably more interesting and considerably more actionable than most people who ask the question expect. Let's go through it properly. Start with the ratio hypothesis because this is the most commonly cited explanation, and it is illuminating even though it is not the complete story. The ratio hypothesis proposes that the perceived length of a time period is experienced relative to the total time you have already lived. When you are 5 years old, 1 year represents 20% of your entire life experience. It is 1/ of everything you have ever known. At 41 year is 1/40th of your life. At 80, it is 1/80th. The subjective experience of a year at 5 feels long relative to a year at 40. Partly because at 5, a year is a 1/58 proportionally enormous slice of lived experience. At 40, the same objective year is a much smaller proportion of a much larger total. The ratio is different, and the subjective experience of duration tracks the ratio rather than the absolute time. This is mathematically elegant and intuitively compelling, and it does capture something real about age-related time acceleration. But it is also incomplete. The ratio hypothesis predicts a simple compression that scales with age. But the actual experience of time acceleration is more irregular and more context-dependent than a simple ratio model would predict. Some years at 40 feel long. Some years at 20 fell short. The ratio doesn't account for this variation. To understand what actually drives the variation, you need to go deeper into the neuroscience of how time is perceived and how the brain registers duration. The brain does not have a single dedicated clock. This surprises people who expect time perception to work the way a wristwatch works, with a single mechanism running continuously that the brain simply reads when it needs to know how much time has passed. The reality is that time perception in the brain is distributed, context-dependent, and substantially constructed after the fact, rather than recorded in real time. The primary mechanism relevant to the age acceleration effect is this. The brain uses the density of encoded memories as a proxy for the duration of a time period. More distinct memories encoded means the time period feels longer when you look back at it. Fewer distinct memories, even if the same number of hours objectively elapsed, means the period feels shorter in retrospect. This is the memory-based model of time perception, and it explains what the ratio hypothesis cannot. The irregularity of time acceleration. A year that was full of new experiences, new places, new people, new challenges. A year that generated a high density of 350 distinct encoded memories feels longer 352 in retrospect than a year of routine. Regardless of the person's age, a year of vacation travel at 40 feels longer in 4 o'clock retrospect than a year of uneventful 4:02 routine at 20. The variable is not age. 4:06, the variable, is the density of encoded 4:08 memory. Now, here is where age enters the picture again, but through a 4:13 different mechanism. Children are 4:15 novelty machines. Not because they are 4:18 more cognitively capable than adults. 4:20 they're not by most measures, but 4:23 because they are encountering a world 4:25 that is almost entirely unfamiliar. Everything is new. The first day of 4:30 school, the first time riding a bike for 33, the first experience of rain, the first 4:36 time trying new food. These are not 4:38 experiences that can be predicted from 4:40 prior knowledge, because there is number 4:41 relevant prior knowledge. They must be 4:44 encoded freshly in detail, because they 4:46 are informative about how the world 4:48 works. Each of these novel experiences, 4:51 generates a distinct memory. The summer 4:53 at 8 feels eternal in retrospect, because 4:56 it was full of novel experiences that 4:58 were encoded as individual distinct 5:01 memories. You remember the smell of the 5:04 grass and the specific quality of light 5:05 on a particular afternoon, because those 5:08 sensory details were part of genuinely 5:10 new experiences that the brain was 5:12 encoding carefully. Adults have seen most of what there is 5:16 to see, at least within their typical 5:18 environments and daily routines. The 5:20 morning commute to work, if you have 5:23 been doing it for 5 years, is not a 5:25 novel experience. The brain processes at 5:28 efficiently, using prediction and pattern 5:31 recognition to handle it, without 5:32 generating detailed new memories. You arrive at work without a clear 5:37 memory of the journey. Not because 5:39 something is wrong with you, but because 5:41 the journey was predicted well enough 5:42 that no new encoding was required. Multiply this efficiency across the full 5:47 day, the full week, the full year. A 5:51 year of predictable routine experience, 5:53 work, commute, grocery shopping, known 5:57 social contexts. Familiar places 5:59 generates far fewer distinct encoded 6:02 memories than a year of novelty. The 6:04 retrospective brain, estimating how long 6:07 that year lasted based on the density of 6:09, its memory traces concludes that it was 6:12 short. Because by the only measure the 6:14 brain has available for retrospective 6:16 time estimation, it was this mechanism 6:20 explains not just the age-related 6:22 acceleration, but also the specific 6:24 phenomenology of it. Why certain years 6:26 feel regardless of age. Why vacation 6:29 time feels short in the moment, but long 6:32 in retrospect. And why the end of life 6:34 feels imminent to old people in ways 6:37 that have nothing to do with mortality 6:39 statistics. Let's talk about the perspective versus 6:42 retrospective distinction, because this 6:45 is one of the most interesting nuances 6:47 in time perception research, and one that 6:49 most people don't consider. Perspective 6:52 time perception is how time feels while 6:55 you are in it. The experience of 6:57 duration as is happening. Retrospective time perception is how 7:01 long a period seems when you look back 7:03 at it. These two measures of subjective 7:06 duration are determined by different 7:07 mechanisms and often produce opposite 7:09 results. Boring, monotonous, unchanging 7:13 experience feels long in the moment. You 7:15 are paying attention to time passing. 7:17, you have nothing to distract from the 7:19 awareness of duration, and the time 7:21 drags. But boring experience feels short 7:24 in retrospect because it generated number 7:26 distinct memories. The day at the office 7:28 doing routine work drags until 5 o'clock and 7:31, then disappears without a trace in the 7:33 retrospective review. Engaging, novel, 7:37 immersive experience feels short in the 7:39 moment. You are absorbed. Time passes 7:42 without being noticed. The vacation, or 7:44 the captivating project, seems to end 7:46 before it begins. But engaging 7:49 experience feels long in retrospect 7:52, because it generated rich, detailed 7:54 distinct memories. The vacation week 7:57 feels substantial in the retrospective 8:01 review, full of separable moments and experiences that can be individually recalled. This paradox that the experiences that feel longest in the moment feel shortest in retrospect and vice versa is one of the most reliable findings in time perception research. It is also one of the most practically important because it means that optimizing for day-to-day comfort and the reduction of boredom may systematically produce lives that feel shorter in retrospect. A life of maximized comfort and routine. A life structured to eliminate friction, unpredictability, and novelty is a life that will feel like it passed in an instant when you look back at it. The opposite is not intuitive, but it is supported by the evidence. The lives that feel longest, that feel most full of time, are the lives that contain the most variety, the most novelty, and the most deliberately accumulated distinct experience. Now, let's talk about the role of attention, because attention is the mechanism that connects novelty to memory encoding, and that provides the most direct lever for intervening in the time acceleration experience. Memories are formed from experience that is attended to. Unattended experience, experience that is processed but not focused on, that passes through the senses without generating cognitive engagement, produces weak or absent memory traces. The commute that is navigated on autopilot while mentally rehearsing a work conversation generates no meaningful memory because the attention that would encode the experience was directed elsewhere. Mindfulness, the deliberate direction of attention to present experience, works against the time acceleration effect through this mechanism. When you pay attention to what is happening as it happens, the experience is more likely to generate distinct memory traces. Walk that you actually look at, the meal 9:57 you actually taste, the conversation you 10 o'clock actually listen to. These generate 10:03 richer memories than the same activities 10:05 conducted on autopilot. By the way, if you want to go even 10:09 deeper into the secret lives of ancient 10:11 humans, I just launched a full course 10:14 called The Secret Lives of Ancient 10:16 Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of 10:19 content covering everything we never 10:22 talk about on YouTube. What they feared, 10:24, how they communicated, what hunted them, 10:27, and much more. Plus, an exclusive PDF 10:30 guide included. Link in the description. 10:32, see you inside. This is not just 10:35 philosophical. 10:37, it is measurable. Studies of mindfulness 10:40 practitioners versus non-practitioners 10:42 find consistent differences in time 10:45 perception. Mindfulness practitioners generally 10:48 report slower perceived passage of time 10:51 and more detailed autobiographical 10:53 memory for recent periods. The attention 10:56 they bring to experience is generating 10:57, the memory density that the brain uses 10:59 to estimate duration, and the resulting 11:02 retrospective time estimation is of a 11:04 longer, more substantial period. The 11:07 practical implication is uncomfortable 11:09 for most modern people, because it runs 11:11 directly against the dominant pattern of 11:13 contemporary life. Chronic distraction, 11:17, the background stimulus that most people 11:19 maintain through near constant phone 11:21 use, background media, and multitasking, is essentially a systematized attention 11:27 reduction program. It ensures that most 11:30 experiences are processed without full 11:32 attention, and therefore without 11:35, generating the memory traces that would 11:37 make time feel substantial. In 11:38 retrospect, a year spent with frequent 11:41 attention divided by a phone generates 11:43 fewer distinct memories of lived 11:45 experience than the same year lived with 11:48 full attention to what was actually 11:50 happening. The acceleration that people 11:53 in highly connected, highly distracted 11:55 modern environments notice is 11:57. Substantially a product of chronic 11:59 attention division, producing inadequate 12:01 memory formation across the days and 12:04 months that constitute the year. Now 12:06, let's talk about emotional intensity in 12:08, its relationship to time perception 1210, because this dimension is both 1212 documented and practically important. 1215 emotionally intense experiences are 1217 encoded more strongly than neutral 1219 experiences. This is a fundamental feature of memory 1222 formation. The amygdala, which processes 1226 emotional intensity, modulates the 1228 encoding process in the hippocampus 1231, which forms explicit memories. High 1234 emotional intensity means stronger 1236 encoding signal, which means more 1238 durable and more detailed memory 1240 formation. This is why you remember 1242 where you were during major emotional 1244 events. Moments of sudden fear, of 1247 intense joy, of grief, of love with a 1251 clarity and detail that ordinary moments 1253 never achieve. The emotional intensity 1256 is directly increasing the memory 1258 encoding signal and producing the 1301 detailed memory that results for time 1304 perception. This means that emotionally 1306 intense periods feel longer in 1308 retrospect. 1309 AM week containing major emotional 1311 events, a bereavement, a falling in love. 1315 AM significant achievement or failure. 1318 contains more memory traces than a week 1320 of even pleasant routine, and therefore 1323 feels longer when recalled. Children's lives are emotionally intense 1326 by default. Not because children have 1331 more intense emotions than adults, 1333, though this may be true, but because the 1336 novelty that produces new memories also 1339 produces emotional engagement. New 1342 experiences produce emotional responses. The first time is always emotional to 1347 some degree, because the outcome is 1350 unknown and the experience is uncharted. By the 100th time, the emotional 1355 response is attenuated. The competent 1358 adult navigating a familiar situation is 1400 hours emotionally flatter than the child 1402 navigating everything for the first 1404 time. And the memory traces are 1406 correspondingly less vivid. Now, let's 1409 talk about something that appears in the 1411 time perception literature, but that 1413 rarely makes it into popular discussions. 1415 of why time accelerates. The specific 1418 role of social time perception and how 1420 other people shape your sense of time. 1422 passing. Humans are profoundly social. 1425 animals. And social context shapes time. 1427 perception in ways that are distinct. 1429 from the individual mechanisms already 1432 described. Time spent in deeply engaging. 1435 social interaction. Conversation that 1437 absorbs attention. Shared experience. 1440 that generates emotional intensity. The 1443 presence of people you care about is 1445 time that tends to generate rich memory. 1447 traces in the social emotional 1450 memory systems that are particularly 1452 durable. Conversely, loneliness and social 1456 isolation distort time perception in a 1458 specific direction. Research on time perception in isolated 1503 individuals, from studies of cave 1505 dwellers and chronobiology experiments to 1507 research on the effects of extended 1509 social isolation. 1511 consistently finds that isolation 1513 produces dysregulated time perception. Without the social anchoring that other 1518 people provide, the sense of time 1520 becomes fluid, poorly calibrated, and 1523 subjectively erratic. This social 1526 dimension of time perception has a 1528 practical implication that is separate 1529 from the novelty and attention 1531 recommendations. Investing in rich, attentive social 1535 relationships is not just 1536 psychologically beneficial in the ways 1538 that the extensive loneliness research 1540 documents. It is also a form of time 1542 management in the subjective sense. Time 1545 spent in engaged social connection, 1547 generates the memory traces, and 1549 emotional intensity that make that time 1551 feel substantial in retrospect. The trend toward more isolated, less 1556 socially rich lives, working from home, 1559 reduced community participation, 1602 entertainment that is consumed 1603 alone. Individually rather than shared has time perception consequences that compound the effects of routine and distraction. Less social engagement means fewer socially anchored memories, means time feels thinner and more compressed in the retrospective review. Now let's address something that is both scientifically interesting and emotionally significant. The relationship between time acceleration and identity across a life. The compressing of time as we age is not just a perceptual phenomenon. It has consequences for identity and for how people construct narratives of their own lives. When time feels slow, when each year is a substantial experientially rich period, the self has time to change, to develop, to accumulate new chapters. When time compresses, when years blur into indistinguishable routines and pass without leaving distinct traces, the self can feel static. Not because it isn't changing biologically or socially, but because it isn't generating the kind of distinct, separable experience that makes change visible in the narrative. People who report feeling that their lives are passing too fast often also report a sense that they're not changing, not growing, not accumulating the kinds of experiences that give a life the quality of having been lived fully. These two experiences, time acceleration and narrative stagnation, are connected by the same mechanism. Routine produces few distinct memories. Few distinct memories means time feels compressed. Few distinct memories also means few markers of change and growth in the autobiographical narrative. The same deficit in experience produces both the feeling of time passing too fast and the feeling that nothing significant is happening. The intervention is the same in both cases. The solution to time acceleration is the solution to narrative stagnation. Deliberate introduction of novelty, challenge, and new experience that generates the memory density the brain uses to construct the sense of a substantial changing life. Let's talk about what this means practically, because the research on time perception converges on implications that are specific, actionable, and somewhat countercultural. The lives that feel longest, that produce the most subjective time richness, are not the lives that are most comfortable or most efficient. They're the lives that contain the most variety, the most novelty, the most challenges met for the first time, the most places visited that were unfamiliar, the most skills learned that were initially difficult, the most relationships formed with people who were different. These are the experiences that generate distinct memories. These are the experiences that make time feel substantial in retrospect. The standard life advice of finding your comfort zone and settling into it is, from a time perception perspective, a recipe for a life that will feel very short when you look back on it. Not because comfort is bad, but because comfort produces the routine and prediction that eliminate novelty and therefore reduce memory formation. Learning a new skill genuinely new, not the incremental refinement of a skill you already have, generates novelty throughout the learning period. Each session is slightly different from the last because your ability is changing. The experience of learning is consistently novel in a way that the experience of competence is not. A musician who is learning an instrument is generating more memory traces per hour of practice than a professional musician playing music they have played hundreds of times. The learning musician's time is richer. Travel is the most commonly cited intervention, and it works for the documented reason. New environments, new sensory inputs, new social contexts, new food, new navigation challenges. All of these 2011 generate the memory density that makes 2013 time feel substantial. A week in a 2016 genuinely unfamiliar place generates 2018 more memories than a month of home 2019 routine, which is why travel weeks feel 2022 short in the moment and long in 2024 retrospect. and why the year you 2025 traveled extensively feels longer in the 2027 rearview mirror than the year you stayed 2029 home. The travel intervention doesn't 2031 require expensive international trips to 2033 work. And this is worth emphasizing 2035 because the expense barrier causes many 2037 people to dismiss travel as a time 2039 enrichment strategy available only to 2041 the wealthy. The mechanism is novelty, 2044 not distance or cost. A weekend in a 2047 town 2 hours from home that you have 2048 never visited. Eating food you have 2050 never tried. Navigating streets, they're 2053 unfamiliar. This generates the novelty 2056 based memory density that makes time 2057 feel substantial. The geographic 2100 hours distance is irrelevant. The 2102 unfamiliarity is what matters. Novelty 2105 can be introduced into ordinary life at 2107 no financial cost through deliberate 2109 variation of routine. A different route 2111 to work. A meal from a cuisine you have 2114 never tried. A conversation with a 2116 stranger you would normally not engage 2118 with. A book in a genre you never read. A physical skill attempted for the first 2123 time. Each of these injects novelty into 2125 AM day that would otherwise pass on 2127 autopilot. And each generates the memory 2129 traces that make the day feel like 2130 something happened in it. The 2132 accumulation of these small novelties 2134 across a year does not produce the 2136 dramatic time enrichment of a year of 2137 adventure travel, but it produces more 2140 than a year of pure routine. And it is 2142 available to everyone regardless of 2144 financial circumstances, health or life 2146 stage. And this is ultimately the answer 2149 to the question in the title. Time feels 2152 faster as you age because the proportion 2154 of your experience that is novel 2156 decreases as you accumulate experience and settle into the routines that predictable adult life produces. The brain measures retrospective time by memory density. Memory density is produced by novelty and attention. Novelty decreases as familiarity increases. Attention decreases as habit and distraction dominate. Social engagement, which anchors memory and generates emotional intensity, often decreases as adult life becomes more structured and less spontaneous. The result is a systematic reduction in memory density per unit time, as life becomes more predictable, which the brain experiences as time passing faster. The good news is that this mechanism is responsive to intervention. The compression is not inevitable. It is the product of specific conditions that are partly under your control. More novelty, more deliberate attention, more challenge, more social engagement, more first